Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of dailydead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James, and today I am joined by Derek Anderson. It's been a little bit. I think I've been gone for about a month, so I'm glad to be back in the saddle, as they say it.
Yeah, glad to have you back. It does feel like it's been forever. We went through the Halloween season and the hangover after the Halloween season, so it's glad to have you back. And yeah, here we are almost into the holidays, so it's a good time of year to catch up on some horror.
It's amazing how quickly time has gone by. I remember I don't know if it's an age thing or if it's just so much is going on in the world and you get busier. There's got to be some, and I've heard, I'm taking us off topic right away, but there's a Jeff Goldblum, there's that show he's got on Disney Plus, and they kind of talk about this a little bit. I guess there was, and I'm just trying to remember this, but there was some expert in who was talking about memory, and that I guess that things like that we forget things or that things seem to go by differently because like we're making less like impactful memories over time. I assume there's some science to how we perceive time that we haven't exactly figured out. Whatever the case, because I remember being bored. I remember in the summer, you know, when you're a grade school and you're like, I got nothing to do. You know, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have any of that stuff, and it was just like I'm bored. Now I'm like, years fly by. I remember the beginning of the pandemic, and here we are, 3 years in. So.
It is very surreal. I mean, I was just thinking like today, 2019, that, was 3 years ago. How is that possible? But it is a blur. And I feel like, just there's so many factors that go into it. And, there's technology and just being constantly multitasking and all that stuff. But maybe it is something as you get older, time just kind of melts like a candy bar left in your car.
Yeah, that's just like that. But yeah, it's good to be back. It's interesting because Corpse Club was very structured in the beginning when we were just starting things off. We knew the topics, we prepared ahead of time. And for those of you who have been listening to us from the beginning, and then you'll know that things shift. I mean, then that is, and I will say that like that has always been Corpse Club. Like episode 2 was Origins, where Patrick and Heather had their own spin-off episode in episode 2, and there's nothing wrong with that. The goal was that when you listen to Corpse Club, you don't know necessarily what you're going to get. You don't know who is going to be on the line, and so that was always built in. But I think during the pandemic, especially, it was a lot less structured, and it was like I said, a way for us to catch up. We didn't see each other in person anymore, and so that's how we did, and that's still the case. There's still a lot of people who are staying inside because of the pandemic. Some people may be like, "What? I thought the pandemic was over. Nobody's wearing masks anymore." But there still are a lot of people getting infected with COVID. There still are, unfortunately, a lot of people that are still dying every day with COVID. They don't really talk about it. There still are hundreds of people dying, and so it's still very much with us. And I've been out for, I don't know, the last 4 weeks, I had an unexpected death in my family. I was providing care to one of my relatives in their last days. And so that's why I was out. So I've taken a step back a little bit from my day-to-day work on Daily Dead. So things have been a little slower there, but also I wasn't able to join the podcast, and I've missed out on quite a few things. So the Halloween season has passed me by. I am working on catching up on some things. I will start ahead of time. I did prioritize, and that's kind of where we're going with this. I prioritized what I wanted to catch up on, and so we'll talk about one of those. But lower on the list was Halloween Ends. I don't know how Halloween ended. I don't know what people thought about it. No, that's not true. I know it was very polarizing online, but I don't know why. So I'm going to try to rectify
there could
that.
be several reasons.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to rectify that soon, and I will see Halloween Ends. But I feel like in terms of my priority list, like I made the right choice, and I feel like and as many people know, and as I say all the time, like I love the first Halloween movies. I'm not a huge fan of the overall franchise, where like I go back and revisit the later sequels, so it's not as precious to me as other things. But one of the things that I was dying to catch up on, I finally did, was Smile. It's Smile's been huge. This is I feel like we say this almost every year lately, but like this is a great year for horror. And I think, what's really been great about this year in particular is that you have movies that are unexpected hits that are kind of breaking the mold. You have Smile, which started out as a short film, and during the pandemic, it was made quickly. It was planned to be something for Paramount Plus, and it did so well in terms of testing that then they released it theatrically, and it did over $200 million at the box office. You have Barbarian, which also did really, really, really well. It's still unbelievable to me that Disney, of all companies, was like, we have a Predator sequel or Predator prequel, but we're going to put out in theaters Barbarian, and kudos to them for doing it and for hiding a lot of the mystery behind the movie. That was a big one. And then, of course, you got Terrifier 2. That one I haven't had a chance to see. I was dying to see it in theaters. I wasn't able to. But to see that movie really take off, a movie that cost, $250,000 and is going to make more than 10 million easily. Like that's really impressive. And so horror is doing big numbers. And of course, Halloween Ends, it did well. Did well too. So horror is as strong as ever at the box office, and for good reason. And yeah, so I had a chance to see Smile. It is now on digital, and it's on Paramount Plus. And yeah, it's good stuff. I'll say I want to do some spoiler talking. It's been out for a little bit. I know that you talked about it previously as well, but we'll do a little bit of a spoiler talk. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend checking it out. And if you want to advance 15 minutes on this, I'm sure we'll get through it in that amount of time. But what a cool concept, because it kind of merged elements of The Ring and elements of It Follows, but it just executed it so well. The movie is unnerving from the very beginning. There are things that are done with this movie that are just really top notch. Things that you don't even necessarily will pick out in other movies, like the sound design. Sound design is really excellent. This movie heavily relies on sound, and there's even little things like opening the cat food or placing a wine bottle on the table. There are just these little sounds and just the choices that were made and how sound was executed. It's such an integral part of what makes this movie effective. The soundtrack and score is excellent. And then I think one of the big things that this movie did well, another thing that Barbarian pulled off, is not revealing what we're getting into by the end, because I did not expect it. I expected it to be a pretty straightforward, that you just see this the kind of smiley, the smile faced entity that's haunting her. I thought that was it. I did not expect an ADI practical creature that looked like something out of Junji Ito's imagination. And so I went from really enjoying this movie to, by the time I saw the end, and I'm like, I was completely sold. So really, for me, one of the best movies I've seen this year.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you got a chance to see it, and I'm glad that it was so quick to come to Paramount Plus. A lot of people can check it out now, because this one, there's so much that came out over the last couple of months. It almost felt like something like this could get lost in the shuffle, and it obviously didn't, because the box office numbers don't lie. But it definitely is nice to see that it's out there now and people can watch it over the holiday season and hopefully keep that momentum for it going because yeah, like you said, it is so unique and it goes in a direction that where it's almost like a creepy pasta creature, like you mentioned Junji Ito, which I think is a great spot on comparison there. And I did not expect them to go like full creature feature by the end of it, but they definitely did because it's such a psychological and mental horror movie for most of the film. And then it like gradually peels back this other layer, kind of like, as you mentioned, Barbarian does, where it almost becomes a different movie by the end of it. But it's just so exciting. It's so awesome to see that, you know, this was a first feature film from Parker Finn based on his short film that Laura Hasn't Slept, which I saw is actually going to be included as like a bonus feature on the Blu-ray release.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great. It's like a new voice in horror. I mean, obviously there's influences there from, you know, like you mentioned The Ring and It Follows, and those two movies were definitely at the forefront of my mind when I was watching this. But it's so great to see you know, original horror do so well and find its audience, you know, in theaters and now hopefully on digital as well.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's just been cool to see, you know, horror winning at the box office and so many different options for people. If you want a franchise film, you got Halloween. If you want brand new stuff, you got it. If you want indie stuff, you got it. You know, long form series on streaming. You know, because of course there's things like Midnight Club and Cabinet of Curiosities. So many choices for
Oh my
people
goodness,
that
yeah.
it's that you almost in many cases like you're not able to catch up. But not that I'm
It's
complaining.
I mean, yeah, I think back on when we were recording episodes throughout August, September, October, there was a stretch, I think it was a 5 week stretch where I went to the theaters like once a week just to watch a brand new horror movie. And sometimes I was going to theaters twice because I would see a movie with my friend Zach. And then like if a new horror movie came out, whether it was like Pearl or Smile or Barbarian, you know, it was just like, okay, I gotta go and see this now just so I can try and keep up with all these movies. And there was Don't Worry, Darling. I mean, it's amazing like just what an epic run we had for like 6 weeks of like a new theatrical release, and that's not even counting, you know, like you mentioned the Netflix stuff or like the Paramount Plus stuff. Like there's just so much you can't even keep up with it all, which is an amazing. It's a great problem to have. But and I know we've talked about that before on this podcast, where there's just so much new horror now, and it only looking at the market too, and like where the numbers are for the box office and what studios are doing, it looks like it's only going to get bigger and more stuff out there for people to watch in the years to come. So yeah, Smile is definitely a part of that. And also with Smile, I'm curious if they'll do a sequel because, you know, you get good numbers like that. It's a great kind of story where you could continue this in a number of different ways. So I'd be curious, but I said the same thing about It Follows, and we haven't seen a sequel to that yet. So who knows?
Well, you know, I may have asked Parker Finn that exact question earlier this week. Well, it depends on when you're listening to it, Corpse
Oh
Club listeners,
boy.
but you probably would have that interview already on Daily Dead because I will be publishing it very soon. But yeah, I talked to him for about 10 minutes. We went into spoiler discussion because obviously the movie's out. So we talked about creating the creature. We talked about his thoughts on a sequel. And I will say that what I proposed potentially was an unexplored avenue was the nephew in the movie. The nephew experiences trauma. He sees the dead cat, and there's a specific shot where he's looking out the window as as the main character, as his aunt is experiencing all this. And it was a shot that they show it and then they don't go back and reference it. And usually that kind of stuff, you could see more that was on the cutting room floor potentially. Or it could also have been to show that, hey, this is how trauma impacts people. But also I'm like, did he see the creature? Does he have the ability to see it? I don't know. But I did ask about it. So it was, we got some interesting stuff coming up. But yeah, I definitely think, what we're talking about, though, especially with some of the studio horror, we're talking about Paramount, who definitely knew how to make Friday the 13th sequels. And definitely knew that they should make Paranormal Activity sequels. So I would not be surprised, even if Parker Finn does not direct a sequel to Smile. I think it's very likely we will see a sequel to Smile.
Yeah, that definitely has franchise potential. I'm really curious to dive into this interview that you did after hearing that. And I love, yeah, the nephew part is really interesting because it just seemed like there was more to that maybe it would be in a deleted scene or an extended version, but it definitely seemed like,
Yeah, I'm like,
okay,
there's a thread
this.
we didn't explore. So that kind of,
Mhm.
because I had I had thought, because I had heard people talk about how Smile was a downer. And so when I saw the end of it, I didn't think that was the end. Like, I was like, because for me, it was a little obvious it was headed in that direction. And I get that it's a downer, but I thought that that's kind of where it was going to end up. I know it didn't go that way in the original, like in the Ring, but I figured it was going to go that way with this. I don't, and also, again, I had that ahead of time. So what I thought was going to happen is I thought we were going to see the same Smiler entity take out the nephew. I fully expected that to be the end of the movie. And so, because I'm like, well, we see it there, so that's where I thought it was going. Again, I still love the movie regardless, but then I'm like, well, I thought there might be something there to it. So I did poke at that. Admittedly, I didn't get very much out of Parker Finn, but I had to ask.
Oh man, I imagining that ending, like it's already such a mean-spirited ending. Like if they went and did that too to the kid, like man, it's just that would really be bleak.
Yeah, well,
So
again, we're a little desensitized to this. So when I heard it was a bummer ending, and then I started seeing the movie going, I'm like, oh, he's gone. um, but it's funny how we're laughing through that. But no, the movie's
yeah.
great. It lived up to the hype. That did, Barbarian did, and it helped kind of going in knowing as little as possible. And then something else I will talk about very briefly, because social media reactions were allowed, but I don't think like a full review is allowed for it yet. Is I did see Violent Night at New York Comic Con. So I saw the premiere of that. It was my first time back at NYCC at any Comic Con in the last few years. So I did have a great time there. I met up with some people I haven't seen in a long time. I got asked to moderate the Rise of Queer Horror panel, and I was not expecting to do that. And so there's somebody who was supposed to moderate it, got sick, and they asked me like with an hour or two to spare, and I'm like, of course, I'll be more than happy to. And so I was able to moderate that panel. There were some great authors: Kayla Cottingham, Vincent Torrado, Katrina Monroe, and the goal of it was to talk about their books, but then also queer themes, and queer horror becoming more prevalent in general, and then also how they were able to kind of break in the industry, because people had questions who were in the audience. Hey, how can I do what you do? How can I tell queer stories? How can I reach out to agents that may want to that may be interested in publishing the material that the stories that I want to tell, because they're not what you might traditionally see run through a publisher. And so anyway, so it was a very very like motivational and uplifting panel, and it was cool to spotlight those authors. And so so that was fun. So I did that, and like I said, I got to see a number of people I haven't in a while, and then one of the other things, like I said, is I saw Violent Night. So good stuff all around. Tommy Wirkola, who did Dead Snow, directed Violent Night, which is like, it's John Wick. It's John Wick with Santa Claus. It's hard R. It goes much further than you'd expect it to go. and I'm not, again, I'm not giving a full review of it. I will at some point. I did talk to Tommy Warkala, so we'll see a video interview coming up soon. But what a great movie. So I will just say that for anyone listening, check it out. If you're not checking it out in theaters, obviously, if you want to wait for VOD, that's cool. But when it comes out, I think it's going to be another Christmas classic for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that one. I love different twists on the holidays, and I love how it looks like there's definitely some Die Hard influence in there too, just with Santa trying to take out this group of mercenaries.
Oh yeah,
and be talking to the kid over the walkie-talkie. So yeah, there's a lot there that I'm looking forward to. I remember they played that trailer in front of Halloween Ends when we went and saw that in theaters, and the crowd really seemed to enjoy the whole vibe of Violent Night and the whole premise and everything. And David Harbour as Santa Claus is just like, that's a dream come true. So
he's so good.
And like you mentioned, Tommy Vercola, like I love the Dead Snow films, and just
Hansel and Gretel,
of course,
yeah, because
Witch Hunters,
yeah,
yes.
Think about it for a second, but that one was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that when I saw it. And so
that was another one where it seemed like we were going to get a lot more of those movies. As always just talks about that.
Yeah.
But no, that's great to see him behind the helm for something like this, and just that whole premise it's kind of, it almost makes you think like, how is this not done before? Like I know there's been some Santa movies like that, but just the whole like Die Hard John Wick element, like it's so cool, it's so fun, and yeah, I'm definitely excited to check it out.
I think what it was missing was like the John Wick team, because it's what I can't remember what the name of the company is, and it's going to drive me nuts. You're gonna have to look, fact check me there. It's like 87 or 84 North. And I could see the logo too. I don't remember the number, but
like the stunt team behind the
it's
movie?
A production company, and so they have worked on the John Wick movies, Atomic Blonde, Nobody, and you really need this kind of expertise to pull this kind of movie off in the right way. There is just this could come off very cheesy in a way that it doesn't feel believable, but because they know how to handle action and they're perfecting it, they can show these like ultra violent moments, but it feels grounded in reality to a degree. And that's what this movie and the others have done really well. And that's what I think sets us apart.
And you are correct. It is 87 North.
Ooh.
So,
and they also did
fact check.
I did, and they also did Bullet Train. I know you saw that one recently. I caught up on that.
Yeah, that one was a lot of fun. I loved the action. It actually was way more of a whodunit than I expected it to be, and so it felt like my I guess the best way I could put it was like Murder on the Orient Express on steroids, where it just felt like if you took that premise but then just put it in, amplified the violence, the action, but the characters are so fun too. It was such a fun movie, and really took some left turns I didn't see coming. So that one was one of my favorites probably of the whole year, to be honest.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of fun with it. It's very twisty action, as I mentioned, grounded, great. I like a lot of the characters that they built. I feel like the movie overstays its welcome a little bit. The movie's like, I don't know, 220, 210. I feel like
it's a long one.
Yeah. I feel like it needed some editing, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes shorter. There seems to be some slowdown where, you start looking at your watch. Not that I have a watch that I look at, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's the hypothetical watch.
The hypothetical watch. But I will also say that especially some of these movies, I think they benefit from a rewatch, because there's your expectation for what this movie might be, and then you get something that might be slightly different. I will say, like, Atomic Blonde was one of those movies where I was like, I like it, but I don't know if I love it. And now the more I've seen it, like I really like Atomic Blonde. Like I think it's one of the better action movies to come out in the last decade. And I think it does some things too, because I know everybody kind of goes to John Wick these days, but I think it's a little more stylish. And I think it's a little more. I think it's a little more patient with getting to those action scenes, and I think it really pays off because of it. And Charlize Theron's great. So yeah, and I just watched Atomic Blonde again like a couple weeks ago, and it's got a killer soundtrack.
Oh yeah, well yeah, and the whole setting with I believe it's the 80s and just
Yeah,
the
80s
the
Cold
city
War.
and everything.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they're able to kind of play on that and bring it that style, that 80s style, but in a different way though too. It's not like the 80s you're used to seeing traditionally like on film. So I think there's a lot of cool like kind of quirky things that they put in there, and I think it's definitely stood up well.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I've definitely for a little bit we were in that like Born, what Born? I don't
Shaky
know
camera.
which one's first. So I remember Born, Ultimatum, Supremacy.
Supremacy.
No, that's not the first one.
Not the Born Dilemma.
You fact check us
wow, this
again.
is
I haven't seen. I'm not the biggest fan of the Bourne franchise. I appreciate that they're well done, but they're
Identity, of course.
there you go. But yeah,
Yes.
I should have known. But there was that time where it was like everything were those really quick cuts, and you couldn't really tell what was going on. It was more grounded action, and we saw that kind of like. Kind of had an effect on like Casino Royale, and I mean, and that movie was great. But I feel like what we're getting in this like John Wick era of action is because it's directed by people who were stunt coordinators and choreographers and second unit directors. They're allowing that work to shine more, and they're pulling back, and so you get to see the choreography, and you get to see the training, and of course I know you got a martial arts background, I got a martial arts background, we want to see it, and so
right, yeah.
And so I think that's what this like I said, this era of action filmmaking does really well, is it allows you to see it. And that's what's been really cool, and bring it full circle, and you see it in Violent Night as well.
That was a good roundabout way to get there.
Yeah. I tried. But yeah, I've caught up on some other movies and shows. I still have plenty to see. I think, like I said, Halloween Ends is kind of the big one. It's Christmas, Bloody Christmas from Joe Bagos. That one also it's not I need to catch up on. I'm going to see it. So like that, yeah. I'm looking forward to.
Yep.
I will be seeing that soon, like this week. So I'm excited to see that one.
Nice.
And we have a lot of good stuff. I have not seen Cabinet of Curiosities. I have to catch up on it. As we mentioned, there's so many things to catch up on. I did see Hocus Pocus 2. I was not a fan. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think you were pretty good with it.
I was kind of with an asterisk. I was good with it for what it was. Like, I had to take the original film out of the equation just because it is so beloved, and I wanted to kind of evaluate it on its own. But yeah, I mean, I had fun with it. I think there's definitely some things they could have done differently, like as far as really incorporating Salem into it more and making it feel more like a Halloween movie. Just, I don't know, it was kind of missing some of the whimsical adventure of that first one. But I had fun with it. I do think part of it was maybe a little too much like a Walgreens commercial. Like, if you've seen the movie, that there's some blatant.
Yeah, we can spoiler talk on that, but yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, I mean, it felt like, how you get those reunion specials, and then it's like sponsored by. And it was like sponsored by Walgreens, sponsored by Roomba. I mean, there's way too many Roomba jokes there.
Although I will say with the Roombas, at least it made like it actually made a difference in the plot in the third act where it vacuums up the salt circle that's keeping
I
them
mean,
inside.
I know you
So
can see my face. Our listeners can't, but I'm like, you see the Roomba like four or five. There's like four or
that
five
one
Roomba
got me.
scenes. Yeah, Christy was the same. She was like, because I was complaining about it. She's like, it's working. They're using it. But yeah, it wasn't my jam, but also it wasn't necessarily made for me. And so for those who like it, then that's great, and I am happy for you. But yeah, I was not too happy with that one. And yeah, I'm trying to think of what else I've seen. I've been watching. Oh, I saw Little Demon. That's something else I caught up on. Christy's been wanting to watch it for a while. It's like Danny DeVito and his family are uh, like creatively driving it, both like from a production standpoint and in terms of voice acting. Dan Harmon from Rick and Morty and Community is producing it, and it involves a basically the spawn of Satan. It's Satan's daughter, and the he's no longer talking to the mom, so it's a single mom who's raising this Antichrist, and she's 13 years old, and she's in school, and she starts to develop her powers, and it is a hard R cartoon, and definitely with like Rick and Morty sensibilities, and I'd say even taking things maybe a little bit further, because it has there's nudity, there's a little more like it's a little less filtered when it comes to swearing, so I think to me it pushes it more than Rick and Morty does.
Oh wow.
Not that that's a definite, what do you call it, a sign of quality, but that just lets you know what you're getting into. And it's interesting. It follows like a regular sitcom format. So every, it has kind of like these horror elements and like I said, likes to push the envelope, but then it sticks to like a familiar kind of weekly adventure or weekly, problem that the girl runs into. But I would say they definitely have a lot of horror references. So whether it's Cenobites or I think they have some stuff from The Ring. They have all kinds of little nods, and I think they even have the puzzle box. Actually, I know they do, and I think they also do a good job of having some things. They use like jump scares and the way they do the lighting and set up certain scenes. There are ones that are like, there are creepy moments. So I'd say if you like Rick and Morty and you're looking for something that's more in the, what do you call it, in the horror realm, because this is firmly there, it's worth a try. It's on FX, and they have a lot of Danny DeVito, who does the voice of Satan, and he's good as always. He kind of plays Frank Reynolds from, if you're watching
Oh wow.
Always Sunny. So just imagine Frank Reynolds as a devil, and that's what you got here. And there's a bunch of different guest spots. They got Dave Bautista, they got Arnold Schwarzenegger. As I think I mentioned, Aubrey Plaza does the voice of the mom, and yeah, it's and Michael Shannon does a voice as well, and there's a bunch of other guests. So we saw it's one season, 10 episodes, and we just finished it the other day.
Oh, that sounds like fun. I've seen the commercials for that, and it looks like a blast. It definitely looked like it had that Rick and Morty vibe, and then just hearing that Dan Harmon's involved as well is always interesting. But yeah, that's yeah. And Harmon, I know they're doing a Community movie as well, so he's certainly staying busy these days.
Yeah,
But yeah, that is cool. I love when they can do like, because growing up watching like the Adult Swim like late night animated blocks, like I do love that kind of R-rated like surreal horror animation that it's not an easy thing to pull off either. So it's kind of like subverting a lot of things that you're kind of used to sometimes with animation. So it's always fun when you see something new like that come along, and I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, like most shows, it's still trying to find its footing. And so it kind of establishes everything over the first season. And then, we can expect, I think it's going to kind of settle into and kind of find its own, its voice a little bit more in season 2. But yeah, it's been interesting so far.
Season 2 and 3, that's the sweet spot for TV shows, as far as I'm concerned. It's that season 1 is always you're just finding your footing and hoping you don't get canceled so that you can figure things out in season 2.
Yeah,
And
unless you.
before like season 5 or 6, when the contracts have to be rewritten, because of the initial
Oh
like
yeah,
contracts. So it's like, yeah, seasons 2, 3, and 4. That's where the magic happens.
yeah. I was just thinking about The Walking Dead, where it was like season one was solid, and it was like two, three, I don't, and then kind of bumpy road, and then kind of settling into what it was going to do in four. But yeah, depending on when you're listening to this episode, the Walking Dead, the main series is coming to an end.
Mhm.
Final episode, season 11. I think I can't believe how many seasons. I can't
Yes.
believe. Well, I can because I can track when Daily Dead opened based on Walking Dead seasons. But yeah, it's kind of hard to believe. It's in a very different spot. I guess we'll do a little spoiler talk there because I know you're all caught up. I have some episodes to catch up on, but it's in a bit of a different spot. Obviously, they talked, for years about taking the remix approach. So they are not sticking to the comic books. And I think they're veering more from them because they don't have their central character. Rick Grimes is the central character, and Carl are the central characters of the series. And there are others, and Michonne and Andrea in the comic book series. And these characters are nowhere to be found in the TV show at this point. So you obviously have to make changes to accommodate that. In some cases, it was them, killing a character instead of saving one. In other cases, it was, hey, you're not going to be able to get actors to commit to 11 seasons. And so, yeah, so this is kind of taken some different turns, maybe with some different characters, but we're still kind of ending up in the same place, which is the Commonwealth. What have you thought of this season so far, Derek?
It's been a journey, but this season, and even the last season too, like season 10, they had this, within the last few seasons, they've had a really big time jump since like Rick, he kind of, came off the show. So, his character is presumed dead, but if you've been watching the show, you know that he actually was taken by helicopter to one of the larger communities. So who knows really what he's been up to since then, or if he's been held prisoner, or there's some interesting things there. And if you watch The Walking Dead World Beyond, he is it's kind of funny, it wasn't mentioned more, but Rick is actually alluded to quite a bit in the final episodes of The Walking Dead World Beyond, with Polly McIntosh's character kind of talking about how she used him in a trade and how she kind of bartered with him and stuff. So that's like the most information we've ever gotten about his whereabouts. But since his absence, a number of years have passed. So we're kind of, we have some of the same characters, Eugene and Rosita and Negan and Carol and Daryl. And then we also have, like, we've been introduced to kind of like half the cast as newer characters from the last couple of seasons. And they've been able to really bring them together in some interesting ways. Especially Angela Kang. She kind of took over as showrunner in the last few years, and I think she's done a really good job of trying to like shake things up and keep things fresh, because when you've been on the air this long, like 176 episodes, 11 seasons, like sometimes I think it felt like the wheels were spinning a little bit, and it was kind of like, where do we go? Like, how do we make this not feel like filler? And I think she's done a really good job of just kind of, doing new things with a similar like premise that we've seen. Like, okay, these, how do we make walkers scary again? Well, now we're starting to see a more advanced version of walkers who are climbing, and they're able to like grab a knife off the ground, and we're seeing like this, and it's not whisperers either, so we're seeing like a new advanced zombie, which is interesting.
Yeah, and they're kind of taking a cue off the Romero rules,
Right.
and
Yes.
because there are some things, it's kind of interesting because I think there's like this like pop culture understanding of how zombies work, where it's like brains. And then there is like, if you go back to the original Night of the Living Dead, there are um, there are they are able to like pick things up. They're able to break through windows. They can pick up a brick. So there is that. There
Yes.
is also the element where even though they don't deal with it a lot, they don't what do you call it? A bite isn't always required to bring them back. In Land of the Dead, there is the guy that hangs himself from the fan, and he's a zombie. And we do see with the mom in the basement that it looks like she just in the original Night of the Living Dead, she just gets stabbed. She comes back. They do say the
Yes.
recently deceased have come back to life. They do not say that a bite is required. It is just the popular and common way that we see someone turn. And it was interesting to see Robert Kirkman really gravitate to that in the comic books, even though he doesn't do maybe the zombie or walker kind of evolution that we see throughout some of the Romero movies and then into Land of the Dead. It's interesting to see the show pick that up.
Yeah, there's been, and Nicotero has been very heavily involved with the show, both as KNB EFX doing a lot of the makeup, but also as a director. And so I think you get some really creative minds that are like, okay, how can we subvert expectations? And obviously, it's if you've been watching the show from the beginning, like AMC just put out a really cool behind the scenes like hour-long special going all the way back to the early seasons and kind of showing how the show has changed over the years. And it's been revolutionary. I mean, there really wasn't a zombie TV series where you got to like spend all this time in a world overrun by the living dead before. So it's been really cool. It was cool to kind of take a look back at that and kind of see where it's at now. And in this season, it's a lot. It kind of reminds me of like the Woodbury years with the governor, where you had this town that seemed like a idyllic paradise, but there's all this kind of crooked, like really exploitative stuff going on underneath the surface. So they're kind of revisiting some of those themes with the Commonwealth, but it's on a larger scale. Like the Commonwealth, if you're unfamiliar, is like a kind of like a city with like thousands of survivors, and they're all kind of insulated from the living dead outside of the walls, and they've gotten used to living this very comfortable lifestyle, but it comes at a cost to the people that are not as well off. Like money still like kind of drives decisions in the Commonwealth. So there's a lot of people who are don't have as much money that are exploited and kind of sent to do the dirty work. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because kind of talking about like we're deviating from the source material kind of may change the feel a little bit. Like Woodbury in the show and the comic book are very different. Like Woodbury in the comic book was like Thunderdome.
Right. Yeah. And
And
the governor was very
yeah.
different, that
And so
handlebar mustache.
yeah, so you don't have that built up community where it's like, oh look, like he kept society running. And then when they go to Alexandria, it really is just like a suburban community. They were keeping it together, but they weren't maintaining normal life. And so then when they do go to the Commonwealth in the comic books, like it is like they've rebuilt society, like civilization as they knew it continues to exist, but obviously at a cost. And
Yeah.
And that's what we find out in the comics. Rick Grimes walks into the kind of the middle of this, and kind of where there's this not a civil war but civil unrest, and he comes in basically at the wrong time or the right time, but for
More
but
than he bargained for.
yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting from the comic book side. It's interesting as kind of the end of the line for the story. Of course, us readers at the time having no idea that that was end of the line, because Kirkman was always saying, "Hey, this is gonna go on way past the TV show," and of course he's always great with that, and he knew what he was doing. But yeah, I'm excited to see how they wrap it up and what they decide to, because what they wanted to do is have a definitive ending for the show, and to make it to really make it a meaningful ending for everyone who's watched and taken part in the 11 seasons. Greg Nicotero is directing it, so I think that's a really, really good, solid move there, because he's the person who's directed the most episodes. I haven't actually looked at this to see if it's been somebody else. I can't imagine it's somebody else, just because of the of how long he's been around. And of course, he does a lot of the season premiere, mid-season, closing and starting. But it's good to see him get this last episode, which is he's the right guy for this.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious to see where they're going to end this storyline versus where they're going to take the Rick and Michonne series, because we know there's a series with them, and I would imagine that they're going to save how they end the comic book series for how they decide to wrap up the Michonne and Rick series. But maybe we get some Rick Grimes in the last episode, and maybe it does go completely different. I won't spoil anything for either the comic book series or what we can expect from the TV series. I'm just curious, and obviously we'll know very soon.
Yeah, I've really been, me and my family, it's amazing to think, but we've been watching this show since Halloween night 2010, when it was like, hey, there's this zombie show coming on after the Dawn of the Dead 2004 movie. We should watch that, and it was like, oh, sweet. Like it's going to be a movie that like never ends. It's like we get more than just like a movie runtime in this world. And now here we are 12 years later, and the main series is coming to an end. It's really kind of like, it makes you think of like, man, that's a lot of time that's gone by, and we've been able to watch it from the very beginning. And it's been really cool just to be able to do that. And I know it's had its ups and downs. It's not the water cooler show that it was in those, first 5 or 6 years. And I think, a lot of people may have stopped watching after the Negan introduction, and how
that was it
brutal that
for
was.
A lot of people.
I mean, they literally smashed their viewing audience over the head, and just watching the numbers, because that's always been like, I've always wondered, like, oh, if they had just maybe restrained, held back a little bit on how brutal it was, because even though reading the comics, I knew that was coming, it was a human on human violence. It was different than like seeing someone get torn apart by walkers. So I was kind of surprised they went as far as they did, but they wanted to push the envelope, and they certainly did. And but just looking back at moments like that, though, because that's a long history to look back on, and it's a long show, and I think there's a lot you can learn about storytelling, and in some cases what to do or what not to do. And so it's been interesting. It'll be fun one way or another to see how they do decide to what will the final note be, because even though we have 3 spin-off shows coming up here, this is like the end for a decent number of these characters. So it'll be interesting. I kind of wish that I didn't know which spin-offs are coming, because there would be more suspense with that part of it. But it is, the franchise will live on, and I think it'll be interesting to see where those shows go as well. So I'm hoping for a Rick Grimes appearance, but I don't know. It's I think they might be saving that for later too.
I think you do it. I think you started the series with him.
Right.
You got to end it. I would bet that they're going to do it. I don't see
how great would it be if he like woke up in a hospital room again? Because think of it, like the last time we saw him, a bridge blew up. He was unconscious. What if he woke up in a hospital room again and like didn't know where he was or how much time had gone by? Except this time it would be like an 8-year coma because of the time jump in the show.
Yeah.
Maybe they do like the Dallas thing and it was all a dream.
We'll,
Like,
we'll,
I know
we'll
that's
see.
been an ongoing fan theory, is that this is all a dream in Rick's mind. So it'll be interesting. It's I think we'll see more viewers tune in for that last episode, just to even if they haven't been watching, all the way through, just to see how it ends. So should
Yeah.
be kind of fun to kind of see how, if it comes full circle or not.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to catch up and see if it lived up to expectations, how it deviated from the comics. But you have not finished the comics, so I don't want to spoil that for you. So
I know it's one of those, and I'm so close too. So the comics, I believe, ran for 193 issues, I
something like
think.
that, yeah.
And I'm in like the early 160s,
Oh,
like
you're so
158,
close. 30
160.
issues. Yeah, 30
I
issues.
yeah, I joke that I must have been a big was it Magna, the leader of the Whisperers?
Yeah.
I must have been a big Magna fan, because something happens with her character where I just stopped reading immediately after that happened. So it's
Um, but her character
there was an
didn't.
encounter.
I don't think her character's gone though.
Well, maybe I need to go back and read again to find out.
Yeah, I don't think. I don't
Well, I
think.
know it. I stopped reading right before the Whisperer War,
Yeah.
because but I did read the issues where like Negan was going undercover
Yeah,
as
you
a
just didn't want.
Whisperer.
Some people stopped
Yeah,
reading because they didn't like the, what do you call it? It was too anxiety inducing,
it's
watching their favorite characters go.
I'm telling you though, that I mean Kirkman, what he did at that comic book series, and Charlie Adler as the artist. I mean, and of course Tony Moore in the early issues, but those those comics, especially that first 100 issues, my goodness, he just did not hold back. Like, you think, I remember watching the show and being like, even in those early seasons where like it was all so new, like we weren't as desensitized as we are now to like the zombie violence and everything. But I'm like, I would be watching those episodes and thinking, oh, this is really gnarly. But then the comic book series takes it and like, amps it up like 5 more levels. And so I'd be curious to go back. I really want to do like a reread of all the issues of the comics. But I remember like just how like really intense and like disturbing Kirkman would go with some of those storylines. But I think that's what made it so compelling
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I think he really pushed the envelope, especially in the beginning. So there's like those really memorable, like them getting to the prison, the governor, like that stuff is iconic. But I think he became a better writer. So that's why I'm like the first 100 are good, but I think he's a better storyteller,
Mm-hmm.
especially after he started working on the Walking Dead TV show. So I think it ends as it ends on such a strong note. It ends as well as it begins. In my opinion, it's like one of the greatest comic book series ever made, start to finish. We get a little slowdown in Alexandria, and that's because he's working on the comic books or the TV series. And but like I said, but I still think it's through and through. It's just it's really impressive. So if you ever like the Walking Dead TV show, even if you haven't, whether you stopped watching it, you're still watching it. If you have not read the comic book series, I highly, highly recommend putting that on the top of your list. And I'll say too that if you're like, hey, like I don't really read graphic novels a lot, like I'm just not like into the like black and white. They did colorize the issues, and they were re-releasing them, so that is an option too. Or the original black and white is still available, and they collect them in these collected editions that have like 50 issues at a time, 100 issues at a time, whatever the case is, and they're fairly what do you call it? They're well priced, is what I'm saying, and getting the issues individually. But I think this is a good point for us to stop because we have more we can catch up on next time. So we'll catch up on the end of The Walking Dead, and by the time we're going to take a little break, I think for the Thanksgiving holiday, but we will catch up on Violent Night. We can do a more spoiler filled talk about that, and much more. We want to thank Brian, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode. And as always, we want to thank our listeners, including those of you who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. If you want to sign up to become a Corpse Club member, visit corpseclub.com. You can check out all of our backlog of episodes. You can become a member, you get a membership card, a pin, a t-shirt. You can pick an episode topic as well, depending on your membership level. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Every rating and review really helps. We really appreciate it. And you can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. If you want to get in touch, you can reach out anytime. We're at contact@corpseclub.com. On Twitter, we're at Daily Dead News. We're at Corpse Club. On Instagram and Facebook, we are under Corpse Club as well. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay scary.